Everybody, and welcome to our Future by Design webinar series, where today we are talking about the future of innovation ecosystem building. And I'm very honored to have our guest this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world, now that we're truly global, John Martin with us. And I'll give you a quick intro to John. He is the Director of Ecosystems for the Extreme Tech Challenge and has worked for decades at the intersection of corporate, entrepreneurial, and university innovation. From market analysis for one of the first pre-web online transaction computing platforms to ecosysteming for a Japanese cellular carrier at the dawn of digital mobile and 3G, to a nanotechnology bizdev program and cleantech startup competition, both in the American Pacific Northwest, followed by 6 years doing university relations for Samsung, which transitioned into working on their founding of today's XTC, where he is now posted full-time. John has a business degree from MIT and Babson and a multicultural liberal arts bachelor degree from the University of Washington in Seattle, where he also currently lives. I'm excited to welcome John today to talk about a future by design and creating that vision of what we would like the world to look like in the next 20 years. Welcome, John.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's been a pleasure to work with you, Lisa, and your organizations on Extreme Tech Challenge Australia.
Thank you so much. And we have known each other for a few years now, so it's very cool to be able to have this conversation and share your views on ecosystems with our communities. And so my first question is, where does your passion about ecosystems come from?
Well, first of all, you mentioned that multicultural, which is sort of a history degree. So I guess I've always been interested in how people interact. Another thing that I have mentioned sometimes is there a cartoon that's actually from the New Yorker magazine, a publication of Condé Nast, no plagiarism, all trademarks recognized. They had a cartoon that showed two scientists at a chalkboard filled with equations with Greek letters. And the one is gesturing to it and he says, well, you know, this is fine as far as it goes, but from here on, it's who you know. And it actually took me a while in my career to fully appreciate that it's not only the case, but it's a fine thing that you don't just sort of neutrally post something on a bulletin board or on Indeed or other boards, whatever they say. It really does matter that you have some connection. And this is why for all of history, people have joined guilds, they've joined Rotary clubs, they're interested in going to a particular university or working in a particular professor's lab, because there's this whole other layer of connection. And I think it's actually, if you think of it almost in AI terms, it's a very efficient mechanism. If you meet someone totally blank, you have to do a lot, just like the very first cat picture that was recognized. They had to do a lot of work to figure out what it is. But if you have, if you will call it labeled data, if someone's already done the work to get to know that person, then you have your basic logic thing, which is, you know, if A is into B and B is into C, then you should be into C. So if I know someone that I value, and then that person, and I think we've all had this in life, where you're like, I don't really get this person, but my buddy does. And so if he thinks he's okay, I guess I've got to ride with this for a while. And so that's the essence of civilization. And it's equally important now when there are so many different kinds of innovators and so many kinds of investors, as to how do you sort through and find the right ones.
That's a very good point, and definitely I've learned the lesson as well of it is who you know. What do you think the mindset is of the current landscape of startups and investors, and do you think they're tapping into that global ecosystem as much as they could be?
Well, probably not as much as they could be, but they are doing so more. There have been a number of write-ups. Again, I quote a lot, so no plagiarism, but The Economist actually did a very interesting cover story about a month or two ago called Adventure Capitalism. And it made a variety of points, but one that was for them sort of a secondary point is that if you go back even just 10 years or 15 years, and I know you live this, that back then, honestly, a lot of venture capital was in like California, the East Coast, Oxbridge, and maybe Western Europe. And that was pretty much it. But that now people with money and people with investment ambitions are roaming the entire planet on every continent and are willing to reach out there. Not all of them are, but step by step, more and more are looking farther afield. So I think, and we'll talk more about Extreme Tech Challenge, but the global coverage we have, and for example, including your group, part of the attractiveness is step by step, more and more people are seeking that out, wanting to get a broader coverage of opportunities. So I think we are on trend with where the investment community is going. That is the coming trend.
And you mentioned 10 years ago of it being in certain locations, and now we are getting a lot more global.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see that sort of going and the mindset going in the next few years?
Well, I think, I guess one of the things I would say is it isn't everywhere. There are, I think, perceived to be business hubs and tech hubs, which are more than the few I mentioned, but are not infinite in number. There, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth are obviously some. I'm going to guess maybe 24 around the world. So if you're far afield from that, out in the back of beyond, and I'll get in trouble for this, but I'll pick like Darwin, Australia. That's probably difficult. If you're in Darwin, you probably have to go to at least Brisbane, if not Sydney. But at least there's a node in Australia. And if you're in another continent, it may not be where you are, but if you go not terribly far, there will be a node relatively near you that you can go to get that kind of attention. Another thing I will say is, and this again plays to what you're doing, I think and also ecosysteming, very few investors themselves go everywhere, but you're very familiar with the idea of syndication. And I think they will look to, if there's an opportunity or they're interested in something, they'll look to a local partner. And I'll maybe give the example of Extreme Tech Challenge. Extreme Tech Challenge at headquarters is a very small handful of mostly volunteer people. But what we do is we find, shall we say, the Lisa Andrews of the world in their local market who know their community, who can build their own ecosystem. So we are, if we're not using this word too much, an ecosystem of ecosystems. And I think other investors do that too. They find partners in areas they're interested in. And so first of all, like politics, all investing is local to some degree. So they're looking for those local experts, as you are in Australia, to help them and source deals. And then if they find them interesting, they may go in on them, or they may invest in some vehicle that you have or one of your partners has to go in on them. So there are all sorts of layers of indirect connections before there's a direct connection.
Yeah, we've seen so many incredible technologies over the last few years, and I've been involved and known about the Extreme Tech Challenge for 4 years now, and I know it's been in existence for longer than that. You've just started a podcast and starting to share some of the stories of some of these incredible companies. Are there any that stand out for you?
Oh, well, you know I'm going to get to those eventually. We'll talk about a couple of them now. First of all, before I say that, what I'd like to say is, and this again is about ecosystems. And this is really about media management. There's the primary purpose, which let's say is investment. But behind that, everybody now has to have a message and sort of a theme, not necessarily just content, but they have to have a perspective. They have to have, I don't want to say attitude in a bad sense, but a certain attitude that they're taking towards the market. And they need to convey that in some way. So for Extreme Tech Challenge, we're about a very interesting intersection. We can talk more about this later as well. Bill Tai and Young Son, our founders, have talked a lot about this, where for a long time, quote, impact investing or looking at sustainability was seen as somewhat orthogonal to serious investing or making money. And, even in the political discussions, like, do you want to be all green or do you want to just do what needs to be done? And now you don't have to make that choice. You can do both. So in addition to we bring these companies into investors, we're also now starting to use them as exemplars to go out and message this. Here are examples. Here is the way we view the world. And also getting our partners to do the same. And so you start maybe with an investment fund, or in our case, a sort of a competition like certain ones on television whose names are trademarked, but then you go beyond that and you start literally building a community of common interests, of common themes. And I'll also say that we have hoped to do more face-to-face events. We unfortunately got this new version launched at the end of 2019. And so just about the time we were about to party, we couldn't. And we're still not quite yet, but we're hoping later this season and next to start having meetups around the world. So as you do with your organizations, there's several ways of getting that messaging out. So the podcast.
Actually, before you move on to the podcast and some of those stories, I've got a question there for you, because I'm not sure if you know, I may not have shared it with you, but a year ago, you introduced me to Barry Polte, and Barry was on our Future by Design webinar series a few months ago. But actually, shortly after that you introduced us, I invited him to be a judge of the Extreme Tech Challenge in Australia this time last year. And we ended up partnering, and now we co-invest in a number of different technologies. But does that one connection, I think I haven't thanked you for that yet, but you do make a lot of personal introductions all the time.
It's interesting. That really is a useful role to have. There are people they call connectors, and the world is full of billions of people, and you can never have enough connections. And I find it interesting throughout all my professional career, and even just my residence, that people often know folks of a very similar role around the world, but they may not know who's literally across the hall from them or across the street from them. And so you never can have enough of these connections. And so I'm glad we're able to do that.
Yeah. And also, so my question is,
please,
currently now there's thousands and thousands of people in the XTC community. How do you know the right person to connect them at the right time? And I guess the technology that exists now, and I know the platform that XTC uses is wonderful, so we can see different startups and technologies all around the world. And I'm currently in Mexico at the moment, and you've shared a filter with me of the Mexican startups over here, in case there are any that interest me to meet while I was here. How do you actually think about an ecosystem in that way, and how to connect people?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question, in that I was thinking earlier that a way of describing where I think ecosystems are going is sort of like crowdsourcing, in that and if you go back and think about broadly ecosysteming as being a useful activity, in earlier history, that was, as you suggest, very hard to do, and there was very limited bandwidth. And so only the largest corporations, the largest banks, Chase Manhattan, Man on the Spot worldwide, could do this. Now, with our technologies, here am I in Seattle and you're in Mexico talking to Australia over the internet. And so you can post things up. People are now used to looking, sorting, searching, keywording. So a lot of what we do is not my curating, though there is that role for some functions. But if you put up a tool, which, as you said, we have this platform, and that gets continually enhanced, and we give our partners and our sponsors and our friends access to that. and then they can go search for themselves. And then we can maybe help them with what the right tags are, the right search terms. But you mostly let, much as with online shopping, you mostly let people do it for themselves. And if you think of just shopping, you used to want to go to a department store, particularly if it was an upscale store, and you'd have the clerk find things for you. And now, even for high-end luxury goods, many people are quite comfortable just give me the website and I'll go find it myself. So I think that's one of the ways ecosysteming is developing, is if you can put things out there in a searchable format, and that's really the trick, is refining that searchable format, then a lot of people can do it themselves. And then if you happen to run into them or they ask you, you can, to the best of your knowledge. But also, to your point, I can't know all the thousands. I know the finalists. But if they have, and then that also importantly becomes, as with LinkedIn or dating or anything else, it's incumbent upon the entrepreneur or the investor to present themselves, to tag themselves in a way that the right kind of people will find you, using the, and I don't mean deceiving, I just mean use the right tags, get out there, utilize all the little menu tools so that you are findable. And I think sort of business and investment ecosysteming, and I'm not an expert on dating, but business and ecosystem is going where dating is going, which is you tag and find for yourself. And there's a lot of noise in that, but it can also be very effective and get you to places you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I've pulled out of that, what you're saying, and it really is presenting yourself of what you need. And an ecosystem really is an opportunity for you to be 1 degree of separation from anything that you need, whether it be investors, mentors, capital, sales, and partnerships, and first revenue even for a startup could actually come from an ecosystem if they put it out there that that's what they're looking for.
Well, so I will give you this leads me to the podcast. Since we're on this subject, I will give you a couple of examples that are what I talk about being born global. And it's sort of an example of this. And I can't say XTC was directly involved in a lot of this. So the very first one we did was one of our co-winners from 2021, a company called Dot in Korea. Shout out to Eric if he's listening. And what they make is essentially looks like a Braille iPad or Galaxy tablet. Very, very clever device and very sophisticated. But he just had this vision and this idea, and he went back to Korea and got a few of his friends together, and they started working around on this. But he, slowly put it out online and happened to at some point be asked to give a talk to some civic group in Japan. And it happened that there was a journalist there, I think from Indonesia, from one of the tech sites for East Asia. And he happened to write about it, and it was compelling enough that somehow it went viral, and all of a sudden Forbes and the BBC were calling him. And he's still just this guy in a, not quite in his house, but in a little, strip mall shop, lockup, producing this product. But then he's diligently searching online, and he finds that the European Union was having another one of their tech competitions, and they do a huge number of these in Europe. And it was a challenge for tactile interface device. So that's what this Braille tablet would be. So he applied. And it turned out he couldn't win because he wasn't European, but he got like second runner up. And that was enough. Someone was not attending, but was looking at that virtually or searching. He then gets invited to an event in the United States, and he does go to these. This is pre-COVID, but again, he's getting, I don't know, super cheap budget on the back of Air Asia or something to get to these places. Goes to San Diego and either runs into, I forget, or is again, someone finds him online from the US Department of Education. So this little lockup job shop in Korea gets their first big order from the United States Department of Education. And then he enters XTC twice, because the first time he did medium, and then he comes back the next year, ever diligent, and he rises to the top, and he's our co-winner. Well, as that was webcast as this is, some operative in the Ministry of Small Business in Korea sees this and is impressed, runs it up the food chain, and like a week later, he's invited to a presidential commission on innovation that happened to be the next month. So all of a sudden, this guy who's still in his little job shop is making a presentation before the president of the Republic of Korea. And now he's, long story about his next product, which is bigger, but he's now got proof of concepts for that in the US, in Austria, in the Middle East, and in Korea, and is still a startup. So the point is, if you, key element, have a high-speed internet connection and you know how to work your search, you can start global. Another example, podcast not yet done, I'm recording it on Monday. Company in Nigeria called Food Locker, great company. This is a man whose father was a farmer and saw that there was a huge lack of, frankly, ecosysteming, which is another long story we can get into later, in the Nigerian market. So he grows this thing and it's successful in Nigeria, but he wants to do more. So it happens that one of our partners, a great group in California called SVG Ventures, one of the leading investors in ag tech, runs a series of competitions called Thrive, and they launched Thrive Africa. So Femi sees this and he says, I could never get to California, they would never pay attention, but if I go to this thing they've sponsored, this is how I can get their attention. And in fact, he rose up, became a finalist, and won Thrive Africa. And as a result of that, he gets an investment from SVG Partners, which was in fact their first ever investment on the African continent. And then he gets into and because we have a relationship with SVG, their winners become our finalists. So he gets into XTC, he gets some publicity indirectly through third parties. This leads him to, I can only say, some connections in Europe. He won't let me give the details, but hold on just a second.
Someone just heard you talking about them.
Yes.
They're checking in.
Oh, no, it's spam. But he's doing a deal in the EU. That's all I can say. But so here's this guy who's working, again, out of a very small facility, bootstrapping himself in Nigeria, but through his diligence of surfing the web, he gets an investment from America and he's getting a deal in Europe. And since you asked about podcasts, I'll give my third example here, which is a company in Latin America doing ed tech. So this starts in Medellin, Colombia. Wonderful story about a guy who was saved from drug gangs by his teacher, and then he decides to get into the education business. And he designs this thing for a need that he sees with very poor and rural teachers in Colombia. But then he goes to one of these a regional Latin American business competition that gets him more exposure. So then has customers in Central America. Then he goes into XTC, ends up winning our ed tech category. Like you gave in your example, one of the judges there liked him so much, he decided to invest in him. So now he's got, further afield customers in Central America, an investment from the US. And now, because what he's doing is a platform and not hyper specific, he's able to adapt this. And he's now, I believe, got a couple of people stationed in India. So very small people in very small operations now, with the tools and the Zooming that we're all doing and searching, can start almost from scratch and be global. And I think that, and these networks like yours and mine and ours are reaching out to them. And that's where I think is a huge change, where it used to be you had to move to one of these 5 hubs. Now there's much more opportunity for people to cross-find each other. And I think it's very exciting to see these innovators from more remote places. I don't want to disrespect them because I love what Femi's doing in Ibadan, Nigeria, and what Juan is doing in Medellin, Colombia. But those weren't places that a lot of investors used to get to, or customers in other continents. But now it's possible. This is what $1 trillion of internet infrastructure has bought us, is this capability to do it. And I think it's very exciting for everyone that more people can rise and succeed.
That's brilliant and great
That was a bit of a
example. Thank
monologue.
you
So
for
now
that.
you get to give me your
That
thoughts
was
on that.
totally perfect. And I know that Bill Ty, he talks about luck, and people just think there's a lot of luck out there sometimes. But then he also mentions that you actually put yourself in the path of luck. And so when you're mentioning each of those different examples, I think, they were conscious about the ecosystem, they knew who they wanted to talk to, and they actually had a purpose when they went out there. And I think about a story that Grace Wong from Liven, and Liven were the winner of the blockchain category back in 2018 or 2019. And she talks about the time that she wanted to meet Bill and how she was heard about this guy who was, an investor, and that she'd been pitching a number of different people all the time and they didn't get her idea, and because it was on blockchain and she was a little bit too early. And so she actually went to a conference and she found him and then approached him and spoke to him and ended up getting his email address and sent him an email every day for 30 plus days trying to get his attention. And he replied when she actually changed the subject line to kite surfing or something like that.
Oh, yes.
So I think there was a lesson in there of persistence never fails as well. But I just wonder how many people out there do you think know the value of the competition? And I know that we're going to be running the Australian finals round 2 next week. Do you think that startups actually do their research online of the ecosystem and the partners and the investors that are involved with XTC before they apply?
I guess the very short answer is I don't know, because I know the ones who do, who are the ones that show up and do well, and we get to see them more closely. So I'm sure there are a lot who don't, but in a way that's a sort of Darwinian selection itself. But I know most of the finalists I've spoken with. There's another one that we're going to podcast in another few weeks, who's a woman founder in Indonesia, and it's a medical product, a medical company called PathGen Diagnostic, and she's a deeply experienced oncologist as a researcher, and then alas also got cancer, so she got to have to deal with her own research. And she knew that she had a strong business drive, but wasn't quite sure how to actualize that. So she saw XTC and the mentorship possibilities, and she said, this is what I, very engineering, this is what I need to build myself out. So clearly she did, and others have said that. But I'm sure there's some who don't. And, part of yours and my job is to convince them, yes, if you're really interested in this, this may be a valuable opportunity for you. But we get enough that rise to the top, so certainly dozens and dozens of them do every year. I'm going to veer off on one thing, and I didn't realize I was supposed to look at chat here. So Mr. Ford, wherever you are, hello, asked, what industry sector do you see with huge potential? And I'm going to answer that again, sort of orthogonally in the following way. If you look at Extreme Tech Challenge, we cover 10 sectors, and it's pretty much the whole field, because we're starting from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they cover pretty much most of life. So we have ag tech and food, clean tech and materials, medicine, automobility, cities, finance, and education. And you see the companies that succeed, and they're working in a wide variety of areas with chemistries and materials or other things. But interestingly, if you look into many of them, not all of them, but many of them, they share this common thread of leveraging massive cloud data analytics, edge computing, sensor meshes, and the like. And so what they all have in common is what's now possible. And this, and you cut me off, I'll get on a long monologue here, but this is sort of one of the ideas behind XTC. One of our co-founders, Young Son, formerly of Samsung, likes to call this the fifth wave of IT. The combination of precision data, cloud, and actually microfabrication, not just of semiconductors, but like medical microfluidics and so forth. And what our other co-founder, your friend Bill Tai, says is that, and back to that you no longer have to choose between being good for society and earth and a solid business. Really, you did up until about 10 years or so, or even more recently. If you go back to the early 2000s, a lot of green stuff was very inefficient and very costly, but it's not now. We've finally arrived at the dawn of the 20s at a period when big data, AI, microfabrication is making possible solutions in a wide variety of areas. And again, I could list all of them, but there are companies in fish farming, in bioplastics. That EdTech company is full of chips. There's a very clever one on making fish netting more actual, like gill netting of fish more efficient. But they all share that common thing. So what I would say is all of these sectors have potential, but the common element is they are finding a way to leverage this fifth wave of infotech. And one also interesting point about that is, and many of them are using blockchain, and I'll just take a minute to talk about this other Australian company that was our co-winner along with the Braille company, Hillridge Technology from Sydney. They are basically doing insurance. Now, insurance puts a lot of people to sleep, but there's a lot of room for innovation, and he's using blockchain to make it in the cloud and completely private. And it's something called parametric insurance, which is a clever idea that's been around for a while, that typically with insurance, you insure against a bad thing happening, and then when you think it's happened, you write them and they come out and make sure it really has happened, and you argue about just how bad is it really, and then after a long argument, they may or may not write you a check. Parametric insurance is you have an algorithm that looks at all sorts of risk factors, and if your measurements cross those thresholds, it just spits out a check very quickly. No evaluation, no long argument. Now, you can discuss what the parameters are, but the parameters are transparent. And so in a way, the instantiation of that is simple, but behind that, again, huge amount of data analytics. He's taking satellite data and weather data, and he's taking all of this and then making a very simple, using behind all the complexity behind it, makes a very simple outcome. And that, incidentally, is because his dad's a farmer and didn't have good luck with a lot of insurance. And he said, there's got to be a way to do this better. And he decided to go out and fix it. So what I wanted to relate to that is also when people talk about using AI, first of all, a lot of people, when they think of AI, they either think of sort of controlling your life or invading your privacy. And that's not really what most AI is about. It's really about providing you precision detail of management of physical processes or operational processes that you couldn't get that detailed before. But people also, and I remember about 10 years ago, someone said, well, you know, there are only 5 of these giant tech companies that could afford this, because you need to have like one whole turbine of a hydroelectric plant to power the supercomputers that will look through 100 million cat photos to determine it's a cat. Well, you don't actually have to do that now. And I actually just stumbled across in another web search an article by Andrew Ng, the famous AI pioneer, talking about small AI. And this is what always happens with tech, right? It starts really big and heavy and expensive, and it gets small. And his point is, if you're doing something like Hillridge is doing, you don't need to do AI on a huge data set. You need to do AI on a very particular data set. And that can be much smaller than the way a lot of AI has been conceived of. So each of these, and again, I won't go through the whole list, but the fish farm company and the food ingredient company and all these other companies are applying AI on a very specific, narrow data set that makes it more affordable, more achievable. And so then back to Stephen's question, and I'm not necessarily saying invest in cloud and AI, but think about how cloud and AI can activate every industry sector. And I'll mention one other thing that I talked to you, Lisa, about earlier when we look at our results, particularly about Australia. We have a couple of mining companies, and people who get very fussy about green might say, how could you possibly do mining? Mining is an evil thing and we must, shame them away. And the answer is no, we're going to be mining things if we're doing all these electric cars, we're going to need a lot of cobalt and a lot of lithium. We'll be doing, and rare earth metals, we'll be doing a lot of mining, but it's better if it's cleaner. And this one company, Mining and Process Solutions, which I believe actually just got bought, so good exit for them, has come up with this process. And what they do is actually make this chemical, but I'm sure behind it, again, is a huge amount of data analytics to figure out the chemistry of this that can substitute for cyanide. Long story about mining, but they use shockingly large amounts of cyanide to leach out the minerals they're looking for. Now they can use this thing that's basically edible, very benign, and it works enough that they've had pilots all over the world on this. And so you might say, who would think the mining industry would be ripe for this kind of innovation? But it is, and it's successful enough that MPS just got bought out. And also from an attitude point, everything needs to get cleaner and better. You can't let, as the old saying goes, the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I think a practical, pragmatic approach to sustainability says, yes, we want to include mining and we want to help mining. And there's another company that just came in through your Western edition called MaxMine, that's basically sort of applying factory automation analytics, deep data analytics, to the operation of open pit mines. Got to have some of them, can be well managed, but if they have fewer trucks, drive fewer distances more efficiently, that's using less energy to get the minerals that we need, has to be a positive. So even that industry is ripe for data AI innovation and for sustainability innovation.
I think what I'm hearing there is that some of these organizations, they're actually solving really big problems. Well, they've found a niche problem in an area that they're passionate about, whether it be farming and weather and trying to help farmers, and they've created technology for that. And I look back even just 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I had an engineering business and sold it back in 2012, but we did large scale process control and automation. And back then we spent $500,000 just on our CRM system. Mm-hmm. And you look now and you download a free CRM system. Yep. And so I look at that trend with technology, and we've never had the ability to utilize that kind of technology or have the resources that we have now. And so do you see that sort of trend, I guess, as some of these startups, they're coming up with these brilliant ideas, they're leveraging this incredible technology, and they are actually solving really big problems?
Absolutely. I could riff on, but I would just completely agree with you on that. That is that crossover that Young and Bill are talking about, that this ability to have these low-cost tools and also very advanced tools, huge number of AI tools available from cloud providers, allow startups to tackle some very big problems. Absolutely.
And this is great for some of the startups that are looking to apply for XTC in this year's competition, or in Australia, where closing the deadline is actually in about 24 hours, I believe.
Yes, please apply.
Yes, definitely apply now. And any questions, please reach out, because I know I have been asked the question, is this an impact competition and aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals? And, what does that really mean for these startups, and do they fit within those categories? And I've seen everyone, the applications coming through and that have actually been successful, everything from pre-seed investments through to $100 million valuation organizations that are actually applying to tap into the ecosystem. And Bill actually shares He talks about impact and the progression of impact investing, in that, if you're actually doing something not so great now, then in 5 years' time, you won't have a business because people are waking up to a lot of this. And if you're not trying to be cleaner or better or solving a problem, then you may not exist into the future. And so it really does apply for everyone.
Yes, and that's again, just to continue Bill's point that we all agree with. Again, it used to be that impact investment, and we actually try not to say impact investment too much because that's gotten sort of a bad meme, which basically means lousy investment. But that now, and the whole point of XTC is the main thing we're looking for, and we actually write this in our judging criteria, is somewhat like the famous TV shows, would you write a check to them? Is this a ripplingly good investment that also is doing good? And the reality is more and more ripplingly good investments can do good. And what Bill likes to say is they're actually getting superior returns because of that. And the flip side is what you said is if you're, who wants to be dirty, but if you're still sort of not very environmental, it's not just that it's not woke, it's that you're going to have liabilities. You may actually have some advantages near term, but our society, our governments, a wide number of factors are seeing these things, actualizing the costs. A lot of them were hidden costs, but they're coming out, and they're going to be liabilities down the line, or just obsolescence if you are polluting, thoughtless about how you go about things. And some of those liabilities are enough, or the obsolescence is enough, that even in net present value, it makes a worse investment. So now, and really, I think this is what you want, is you don't want, I'm sorry, start that sentence over. One of the reps I give, and I say this at the start of my podcast, is part of sustainability is economic sustainability. And if you're trying to be clean only with charity or subsidies or regulations, that's not sustainable. What will truly improve the world is when people can do well by doing good. It's the only way that is sustainable. And if you have a helpful innovation, it doesn't help anybody unless it's really gaining market traction. And if it's gaining market traction, then it's a great investment. So, and again, we think really only now in the 20s are all these threads aligning and pulling in the same direction. So we don't have cross tension. We have hopefully everyone pulling in the same direction, which can ultimately make you optimistic about the future. And I certainly, when I look at all these finalists, it's a wonderful antidote to the daily news to realize these people are out there really making a difference.
That's definitely one of my visions I actually think about in the next 10 years when we have this future of perfect knowledge, essentially with all of the data and sensors and information available, is how do we actually wake up and know what the world's biggest challenges are and then combine our collective productivity to work towards solving those. And I think some of these technologies are definitely looking at those problems, and you'd have great insight into all of them as well. I think there's so many people that don't understand, or they don't realize how much innovation is going on out in the world. And so I definitely get warm and fuzzy when I read the applications.
Well, I'm going to give you another example, just because we live and breathe by our startups. This is a company in Great Britain that is addressing a problem. And, for a lot of us lay people, you don't even realize this is a problem, and then someone's already solved it. But it's about industrial fishing. Now, people go, oh, industrial fishing is terribly bad. You should all have line caught. Well, you're not going to feed billions of people that way. You need to have industrial fishing, but it can be better. And one of the problems is you cast this big net and you get a certain type of fish that you want. And let's say it's a fish that there's plenty of, and it's being the numbers are being managed sustainably. But the problem is you catch, because there are all sorts of fish around, you catch other fish, which called bycatch, like byproduct. And the bycatch may be things you don't want or things that are in poor supply. So how do you avoid that? Well, it turns out someone has figured out that fish respond to different frequencies of strobe light and even different qualities of light, different colors. And I don't know, university researchers have worked in this for years, I'm sure huge amounts of data. But now they can put flashing lights into the fishing nets and program, because also they're LEDs, so low cost microfabrication LEDs that can be programmed to strobe particular colors depending on and particular frequency depending on the fish they want to shoo away. So they built these nets with all these little LEDs in them, and then it will shoo away the fish you don't, not all of them, but it significantly reduces the bycatch. So you just get the ones you want. Now, who knew that was a problem? Thank goodness everyone's off working on pizza delivery apps, but someone cares about the fishing industry. They've adapted these low cost, they got a laptop and some LED lights to do this. And that's just a great example of how you can, if you know your industry and you adapt the new technology, you can really make a fascinating difference in a place you wouldn't think about.
That's really cool. And you've got so many wonderful examples. I'd love to ask you about the impact of ecosystems and if you've seen anyone do it really well. And, I know for me, I've seen startups who have actually written a list of their ideal investors and then being able to see and find where they can get in front of them, like one of the examples that you shared. Has anyone really leveraged and done some amazing things within the XTC network that you've witnessed to leverage the ecosystem?
The short answer is yes. I don't know if I have any specific stories to tell or that I can tell, but
What about the boot
yeah.
camps?
Well, okay, I will talk about the boot camp is a program that we run just before we do our category judging. That's several hours a day for a week, where we have industrial people, financial people, software people, AI people come in and make presentations and also make themselves available for mentorship to the companies. And I would say every year, there are probably a third of the finalists who either are or think they have their act together, and so they don't participate very much in that. And there's a third that's in the middle, and then there's a third that say, this is really a great opportunity. This is really a way to sort of bootstrap up my expertise. And so they lean into it. And to your point, they may not come to all of them. They come to certain specific ones. They look at the list, which we publish, and they say, these are areas that I need to brush up on. Also, certainly, I know some of our folks have identified investors that they're interested in. They can ask us, and if we know them, part of our job is so that's the manual curation. Part of that is to facilitate introductions if they have certain folks in mind. And I think what you're also alluding to is like Femi in Nigeria, the opportunity, I don't know if he knew about it before, but when the opportunity was advertised locally, he said, aha, this is something I can seize to take myself up to another level, to get in front of an intercontinental audience that will take me somewhere. So yes, there are definitely companies that, and certainly the first one I mentioned, Eric in Korea, he's just a dynamo in searching the world and finding solicitations and grants and customers that may be interested in this and getting in front of them. So yes, I give one other example that I think is maybe important for your audience. No matter how much of an engineer or a financier you are, as a company founder, you're going to spend most of your time presenting. And so no matter what else you study, you have to be good at public speaking. And so actually the woman who was our first global finalist in 2020, Luna Yu, YU, from Genesis Bioindustries in Canada. This was not at XTC, but before she came to several other competitions, she was telling me, sidebar, it's on our podcast. She was telling me that she, in college, in engineering school, signed up for door-to-door salesmanship or a door-to-door sales job precisely because she was shy and she knew she had to get over that. So here's someone who puts herself in an uncomfortable position. It's like, I have to learn how to talk to people. So I am going to force myself to talk to people. And now she's so gregarious, and she really works a room amazingly well. But apparently she was pretty shy when she started out. So people who develop that self-awareness and they come up with their, plan to overcome their weaknesses. And one of the things is, no matter what you think you're good at, get good at public speaking, because you're always going to be making pitches to your customers, to your investors, and even to your employees to inspire them.
That's very cool. And yeah, definitely we were talking out this morning about storytelling and the future of storytelling. So it's very relevant. We briefly touched on, when we have spoken prior, around one's personal ecosystem. Can you explain what you mean by someone's personal ecosystem?
Well, I think people are much more aware of that now. It was always true before, but now that you have various social media platforms, in addition to what you do professionally, they're just people that you meet as you go through life that you think would be good to stay in touch with. And I think maybe the other thing that I was saying is that when things get difficult in the world, as they are right now, or even difficult in your business, it's very important that you have some network that you can lean on. And there have been several articles about COVID and the fact that people thought they were sort of like going to sports bars or going to girls' nights out and sort of going woohoo, and that wasn't really what they needed. When COVID came along and they needed to really dig deep, they didn't have a lot of resources. But if over time you're able to find, and I don't think it's ever a huge number of people, but folks that you can really confide in and trust being a big thing, that's just important for your personal health and personal growth, as well as what you do professionally.
Brilliant. And I think XTC is brilliant to be able to expand your personal ecosystem as well.
I've been very fortunate. It's a lucky job to get to meet all these companies and investors.
So cool. So I have one final question for you, and
Yes.
that is to create our future by design. And so the question is, it's the year 2042. You've just woken up. What does the future of what do ecosystems look like?
Just a second. Ecosystems, I think, will simply go more and more in this direction of peer-to-peer mesh networks. They're going to be online, and they're going to be networks of networks. You're going to have personal networks, university networks, investor networks, and you're going to be participating in all of those, and they can cross reference each other.
Please take a minute.
No, I'm sorry. So I don't see anything dramatically different, but I think it's that these online accessible networks that we're building now will just become more and more dominant.
And I've heard as well, empowered by technology, and like you say, we might actually have even AI that helps us put those tags on of what we're looking for and who we can match with.
Yes, certainly. I will tell you. Oh, just another minute.
Yeah.
Bad time to suddenly get a dry spot in the throat. You asked me about waking up in 2041, and I thought of a broader comment to make on that, which is a sort of mental model that I keep in my mind. If you go back to, say, the 1890s, there was some electricity and there was some steam, but by and large, we were still living the way the Romans did. And if you just look around wherever you're sitting right now, your soup bowl, your desk, your furniture, your carpet, all of that basically has been created in the last 100 years. And for the first world and even the developing world, it's a very fine lifestyle compared to the Roman Empire, and we can enjoy it tremendously. Absolutely none of that is sustainable in the broad sense. And that's okay. That was a first edition, and it took us 100 years to get here. But what we are going to have to do for the 21st century is reinvent everything. Your carpeting, your clothing, your Scotch tape. Everything is going to have to be reinvented to truly be sustainable and circular. And that'll take 100 years, and that'll keep, our children and children's children very gainfully employed through the rest of the 21st century. So again, this issue that, well, sustainability is kind of annoying, but all right, we'll do a little bit of it. I think that's going to morph and not to flatter ourselves, but in the direction that XTC is going. That's by 2041, that's going to be mainstream. And there's another phrase from some piece of literature about things happening slowly and then suddenly. I've always liked that couplet, slowly and then suddenly. And I think this progression of what I'll call mainstreaming, or making routine a focus on sustainability in society, is slowly seeping farther. And then somewhere in the 30s, it's going to suddenly switch over. And with the younger generation, we're just like, well, of course, that's what we're doing. And so by 2041, I think, if you will, the XTC focus will no longer be extreme. It'll just be part of our everyday thing, is how to make everything in every way, eventually by the end of the century, completely sustainable and circular. I think that'll be what most development is about in the 40s. And hopefully I'll be around to see that.
I'm sure you absolutely will, and we certainly hope you do, because you have been so instrumental in connecting myself and people in our ecosystem to amazing people, investors, other startups, and you always have those right connections at the right time. So a huge thank you for that. I want to share with everybody, if you are watching this live, and today there is 24 hours left to get your application in for XTC Australia Round 2. And if you are watching this a little bit later on, then check out extremetechchallenge.org, because the applications are open almost all year round. And it's one of the things I love the most about the Extreme Tech Challenge, is that there's always so many opportunities. And so definitely get in there, get an application in, check out the people and the partners in the ecosystem, because it's been so truly valuable, both to my world, and I know a lot of people in the ecosystem as well. And I'm sure yours, John, as well.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I think it's worthwhile doing. We'll certainly try to help you. And I've very much appreciated this opportunity to be on your broadcast.
Thank you so much. Any last final thoughts to share with anyone?
No, probably the note I'd made for my last thought was that thing about how we have to redo everything to be sustainable, and that's going to be mainstreamed slowly and then suddenly. So that's maybe my concluding thought.
Totally brilliant. And I know that the team have put a link to your podcast, both in the live session here as well as online. We will have that link for your podcast, because I love hearing these stories about all the different technologies that are out there and the companies doing amazing things. And with that, I will wrap us up. Thank you so much, John. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for everyone else who has joined us as well, for asking your questions and engaging with us. And for all of those startups applying, thank you for creating what you do. We will see you all shortly.
Thank you very much.